We leaned into that tech and launched Agent in September. And since then, you mentioned the chart, it's just been like a hockey stick. So absolutely insane.
I'm joined today by Matt from Replit. We dig into Replit's speed run to 100 million revenue, their new product, Agents, and how that kind of led to this explosive growth, and what you actually do in marketing when you're growing like crazy.
I think the people who have had all these really great ideas and have these things in their life that they want to do better or that they want to create, well, now they can just create those things. Having something that can write code, but then having something that can stitch all of the pieces together and make it super easy to deploy and share with people, that's really resonated. Video is a very powerful medium for showing people, hey, I tried this thing and I failed, but I'm going to try again. Because you could read, tutorials or documentation or whatever and not understand like my thought processes. That's a good step in the direction that we're trying to head of like educating not just people like on tech Twitter, right? But also people in their work, people that want to build cool stuff on a Sunday evening, people who are just trying to take things to the next level, really empower those users to create.
Okay, wait, Matt, we just realized that you just told me that Replit is not so much a dev tool anymore.
Yeah, so, what we were talking about, right? Scaling dev tools, mostly about tools for developers. And Replit used to be exactly that. It's a company that's been around for a while. I think 2018 was in Y Combinator. And traditionally, the tool has kind of been marketed to developers as a place to learn how to write code quickly and deploy it fast. And that's really what I joined Replit for. But since the launch of Agent, since a lot of the kind of like AI, innovation that we've been seeing, we actually see a lot of users who are semi-technical or even non-technical using the platform. So that introduces a whole number of challenges, but also like exciting opportunities for how to market to these folks, how to help them learn to use the tool in the right way, and how to make them as successful as possible. And if I'm going to draw kind of a parallel here, right, it's kind of like Neon, the database company, where who needed Postgres databases a year ago? Like devs building web apps with Postgres, but who needs it now, right? Like actually AI agents that are building web apps for people and putting databases on their backend. And so there are a whole host of people that are being exposed to data and like all these traditionally developer concepts who have never heard of a database before. And it's the same thing with Replit. Like there are a whole bunch of users who they don't know what a full stack app is. They don't know what a web app is. So it's my job to kind of educate them alongside, right, the more hardcore devs who are now getting into vibe coding and building with the tools in the space.
Yeah, and actually, do they need to know, I guess, is the question before that as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's super valid. And I think this kind of goes towards like what is marketing and what is important and what is developer education and what does it mean? Like, do I need to jump into the difference between like an OLAP and an OLTP database? Like nobody's really going to care, right? But they will care if I tell them, hey, you want to build an app, where you can vote on restaurants in real time and, store them somewhere. We'll actually need somewhere to persistently store that data. That's what a database is for. And agents are pretty good at writing like basic data architecture, right? And implementing it. And so we can kind of stop there at the outcome level. This is the outcome you want to achieve. This is what you need to achieve it. And then really, if you're interested, if you're super curious, you can dive deeper and learn about all the nuances of this tech.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I hadn't really thought about that. And okay, so also just kind of like stepping back, and before we're going to get into this, but maybe we can pull up the chart of of someone's posted your revenue. I'm sure you can't endorse that, but like, or maybe you can. Can you endorse that or not?
We publicly announced that number. So
you publicly announced that. Okay. So there's this crazy chart that's just like it wasn't zero, but it looks like it was almost like zero for a very long time, just because of how big the chart now goes up to in the last year. And I think it's like how much revenue did you post that you'd?
So we announced 100 million.
100 million in like the space of a year, basically. It's like growing.
I think a little less.
Less. Wow. Okay. So unbelievable growth. And so I wanted to like kind of talk about like how, like, well, why has that happened, Matt?
I wish I had all the answers for you, Jack. But my response is going to be a lot of hard work, and the new technologies that have came out, and all of the foundation that was built by the team. Right, Replit has been around for much longer than I've been a member of the company, and folks like Amjad kind of starting the company, building it up into what it is today, and really positioning ourselves to take advantage of these leaps in technologies that came out. So if you look at it, right, again, 9-10 months ago at this point, maybe a little bit longer, time moves too fast. Replit was a platform where you could build and deploy things super fast. You still had to write code. It was still based around writing code, but all the infrastructure was there. And so then kind of when, Sonnet started coming out, these models started coming out. Amjad had been thinking about this for a long time, kind of AI, writing code with AI before Sonnet, but these technologies enabled kind of a stepwise change in the ability to write code with AI. And so at that time, we were super well positioned to take advantage of all of the new stuff coming out, basically what we call vibe coding today. And Amjad and some other leaders at the company made a really amazing decision to lean into that. And so we leaned into that tech and launched Agent in September of last year. And since then, you mentioned the chart, it's just been like a hockey stick. So absolutely insane.
Yeah, it seems like a really interesting story, because I saw Replit speak at AI Engineers like 2 or 3 years ago, the first one, and you built this like amazing model that was like, I think Amjad was announcing it at that conference. It was like this amazing model that was like pretty much as good as all the like foundation models at like code generation, but was like really cheap, so you could make it for free users, and it was like pretty incredible. And like I met some of your team members, and it was like you had like guys that were like built the first versions of YouTube and were like incredible people. But it sounds like that stuff still didn't like quite take off. It was the agents part that like really just drove this crazy growth.
Precisely. And so, yeah, today, our main product is an AI. It's a multi-agent framework for writing code. It has access to all the same tools you would have access to in the workspace, which means that if you say, hey, I want to build a full stack app that, a CRUD app that has access to a database that can do all these things, that agent can provision a database for you, request secrets from the user, store them securely in the environment, build out the front end and the back end of that application, and then prompt you to deploy it in just one click. And so it's the combination of having the infrastructure, having something that can write code, but then having something that can stitch all of the pieces together and make it super easy to deploy and share with people that's really resonated.
Was it like immediately obvious that this was like, was it just like wildfire? Like how?
Well, I mean, that's all relative, right? Like, was it immediately obvious a year ago when we were building this thing and, like we were at the base of that curve? Absolutely not, right? It was everyone coming into the office and just like putting in work to build this thing that was very much a hypothesis. Now, after it launched, I think it became slightly more obvious in the sense that you get like an immediate kickback, like you see the response to the product. So if you go back like, in September and look at the launch, it was very well received. But we're still at, like it is a slight blip on the graph, right, so to speak. And so at that point in time, we're all super excited. We're super stoked. Again, all credit goes to the team for building this thing. I just get on podcasts and talk about it. But everybody was really excited, and you just keep dumping energy and work and effort into the product. And it just feels crazy, right? It's like, okay, well, now we're at 20 million ARR. Like, that's insane. This is great. We need to celebrate this. We didn't expect to get there. And before we can even celebrate, the product just continues to take off. So very much feels surreal, but also super fun and exciting.
Scaling DevTools is sponsored by WorkOS. If things start going well, some of your customers are going to start asking for enterprise features. Things like audit trails, SSO, skim provisioning, role-based access control. These things are hard to build, and you could get stuck spending all your time doing that instead of actually making a great dev tool. That's why WorkOS exists. They help you with all of those enterprise features, and they're trusted by OpenAI, Vercel, and Perplexity. And for user management, the first 1 million monthly active users are completely free. Let's hear from Utpal from Digger.dev, a dev tool using WorkOS.
How it's designed is that you can start as early as day 0. But for us, it wasn't day 0. It was closer to when we first started monetizing, because we didn't have a sign up at all. People could just anonymously use our tool. So it was a little later, coincided with when we wanted to start monetizing, and like we needed a nice enterprise feature set. If you're open source and you're doing enterprise first, the minute you think about monetization is when you should think about Work OS. To be honest, if we do that again, I think I would think about that on day zero, to be honest, because like we should have done it on day zero, ideally. Anonymous usage should be permitted, but you should know who's using your tool. It should be optional, 100%. It should be opt-in, 100%. But it'd be great to have auth from day zero. You don't necessarily think about these enterprise features, but they still lead to revenue. And it kind of is a no-brainer in that sense. So yeah, I highly recommend.
When you've got this kind of explosive kind of product that's, taking off, what things matter? Because I guess like the marketing job is very different under those circumstances. To, regular, like, okay, we grew a little bit this month, like we grew 10%, like great, or whatever,
Yeah, so there are a whole bunch of considerations, specifically on like developer education and quote developer marketing. First, we made a huge pivot in what the product was and who it was, who we're selling to. So like our documentation doesn't necessarily speak to our ICP anymore, and our messaging has to change, and we have to reposition who we are as a company. And we're still working through that, right? Like maybe before we pressed record here, you're mentioning, oh, I've heard about Replit, but it was in the context of a developer tool. Well, it's actually really hard to change people's perception, right? And I still go to events and people are like, oh, Replit, right? Like I used that in college. I learned how to code with this thing.
Yeah.
And so that takes a lot of work. And from my perspective, one of the most important things was getting our docs squared away. So put a ton of work into what our documentation looks like and how, what language we use, the types of frameworks that we use to structure the documentation. So I'm really proud of that. And then along the way, it's been adjusting kind of marketing language, brand guidelines, all of these things to make sure that we're catering towards the right audience, acknowledging that that takes a really long time to change perception like that. But I think we're getting to the point where people understand kind of what the product is about and who it's for.
Yeah, it's that's interesting. I like a couple of years ago, I interviewed Logan Kilpatrick when he was still at OpenAI, and I was like, I asked him the same question pretty much, like, what do you do that matters when like this is such an like kind of viral kind of product? And I think he said the same thing pretty much, was like docs was like his trying to catch up on docs and make docs really good and make sure like it feels like that's I don't know if that's just what happens when it explodes.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I feel incredibly grateful because where we are today, like writing docs 3 years ago, I would have had to lock myself in a cave and like write docs like nonstop. Now I can build the infrastructure and build the tools, and we can rely on AI to get us maybe 80 or 85% of the way there, right? And so there's a lot of really intelligent ways you can approach doing that at scale with relatively less resources or being on a really fast moving team. Like we ship so much stuff, I'm like trying to catch up with writing documentation for the products that are going out. But a lot of advancements in AI, and coincidentally, some of the products that Logan and others are helping build today are enabling us to write documentation faster.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, so docs is a big thing. What other stuff do you are you working on?
Yeah, so I do a lot of like technical content, developer education, and that's mostly through video. I think video is super powerful. We say as we're recording a video podcast, especially for educating folks, and especially in the age of AI, where you're working with tools that are like non-deterministic. I think this is a big piece, especially for non-devs, but for devs as well, right? Like it's a very new phenomena that you might run something twice and get a different result. Like it's just not deterministic. Or you might try something out and it might break, and you might feel like you're wasting your time, but then you try the same thing with some different context and you get this amazing thing that works in like an hour, right? Like this is a very new phenomena. And so I think video is a very powerful medium for showing people, hey, I tried this thing and I failed, but I'm going to try again. Or this is exactly how I think through the problems, because you could read, tutorials or documentation or whatever and not understand like my thought processes for how I'm approaching getting an error in the console and debugging that, or getting my app to look like the way I want it to look. And so primarily documentation and technical content education. I did a course with deep learning a few months back that I think was a good step in the direction that we're trying to head, of like educating not just people like on tech Twitter, right? But also, people in at their work, people that want to build cool stuff on a Sunday evening, people who are just trying to take things to the next level, and really empower those users to create.
Yeah. That's and video, I guess, makes more sense if you're kind of expanding beyond just developers, because developers like reading docs, but a lot of people just want to see, like, everyone's brains have been like just so used to just watching like TikTok and YouTube, and I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think docs are important, but they serve a bit of a different purpose. So if you think about, there's some like really great documentation frameworks out there. I prefer Diataxis. That's like my favorite. And it's very opinionated about how you group documentation. So there's sort of reference material, right? Like I want to look at this thing to understand implementation details or how it works or like specifics of this feature. And then there are like how-to guides and tutorials, which are much more like, oh, show me how to do this thing. Personally, I actually like reading more than I like watching video because I like to move fast, and a lot of times video isn't fast enough for me, and I want to be able to like skip around.
Yeah.
But there are a ton of people for whom video is the much preferred media because there's like this sense of certainty, right? Like I sit down and I watch a video tutorial. I know by the time I get to, like 30 minutes or however long the video is, I should be able to do the same thing this person's doing, and I will see every single step along the way of what they're doing. Or like I just put this thing on the background while I'm cooking or driving to work, and I kind of like absorb some information. I think that's powerful as well. And personally, when I'm really stuck or there's something really confusing or I just don't get it from the docs, I know that I can rely on video for some of those concepts. And so I think that's really powerful. The flip side to it is that it scales. So I can do a video that 100,000 people see. I can't get on a Zoom call with 100,000 people and help them build apps. I wish I could. But those are aspects to video that I really love. The other thing is that I feel like it's one of the most personal kind of media out there because every single aspect can be controlled. The lighting can be changed. The type of camera that you're using, the microphone, your background, all of these things are completely customizable. The way your screen shows up, the phrasing you use. If you tell a joke or if you're like super excited or enthusiastic, maybe you can tell I'm a pretty enthusiastic guy. That's why I like doing videos. These are all things that you can bring to the table if you're making video or creating content that, like, if you read my docs, like I can try to be funny or tell a joke or whatever, but like at the end of the day, it's just text. So
Yeah. I feel like not that many jokes and docs these days.
Not enough. I remember I studied physics in college, and there was a couple like physics textbooks, like the authors would put this like crazy dry humor in them, and maybe it was because they were tenured and nobody could fire them or something. I don't know, but I love that stuff. So that's I take inspiration from that.
Yeah. There's there's this like textbook in the UK that's like for like high school kids. It's like revision textbook. The most popular one is just like full of jokes, actually. Weird. It works though, I guess. So anyway, so yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One thing you said there that I actually missed was you said your favorite documentation framework, Diataxis.
Diataxis. So Diaxis.
And what is that?
It's a way of thinking about doing documentation. So I think that's actually the tagline if you look it up. And so a lot of people smarter than me have thought about this problem. And if you're sitting there, thinking about how do I write docs for my product, or maybe you're writing docs yourself or you're a developer, this is a great framework to think about how to divide up documentation, how to organize it in a way that's useful but also discoverable and navigable for your users. And I think the separate thing about documentation, more of a personal point. I've met very few companies or people where they're just like genuinely excited about writing docs. And I think it's like a really easy way to stand out or to like create something that people enjoy, because everybody has to read docs. And so if you like say, it's kind of like taking out the trash or something, right? Like I'm going to do this thing super well. I actually love docs. I think it's fun to create experiences like this for people, but I'm going to do this thing super well, and I'm going to have a super high attention to detail. It's a really good way to be able to kind of go out there and show people that you care, or to prove that, you can create high quality experiences for developers.
Yeah. That's very cool. I had not heard of that, and that's amazing. Okay, so maybe you could tell us a bit about the agents product, because I think a lot of people probably I would imagine a lot of people listening is like, okay, so you type in a prompt and you get back like a result. But it seems like the experience you built is really, really nice. And one of the things that I noticed is like that I hadn't seen anywhere else was that I type in a prompt, I say, I had an idea yesterday that this is very embarrassing to me on the podcast, but like I snore and it's quite bad. Like I want to like stop snoring, and so I'm using this app, and I was like, it's okay. I was like, I was thinking like maybe I could like vibe code like a better snoring app. Anyway, I put it in and like into Replit, and you get back like they draw out a like a actual like I'm explaining to this to people listening, obviously not you, but like draws out like a mock-up of it, which is not like coded up. And it seems like you have these kind of lots of like separation of like what like little agents doing different stuff, and it's very cool. So maybe you could tell us a bit about how it works. And
Yeah, for sure. I think, from the start, we had this hypothesis that, like we should plan the app out for the user and kind of present that to them before they get started building. And then recently we introduced kind of a visual preview, which is what you're describing. So you go to Replit, you type in a prompt, and the first thing we do is give you a plan of what the agent is going to build and then mock up a visual preview. And it's basically just streaming HTML into the viewport. So like in real time, you'll see the app being built. But that just serves as a basis for the design that's then going to be passed to the agent. And you kind of can confirm all the individual features that are listed out of the app. So we'll give you a visual preview, we'll give you a list of features, and then you can say, actually, for my snoring app, I don't want to, like maybe track, very specific snoring details. But I do want to, list like my the peak number of decibels or something, right? So you can adjust that
that's
and then
actually
start building.
that's a key part. Yeah.
Yeah. And so from there, you kind of get dropped into the Replit workspace, and agent's going to start scaffolding out that app and building it for you.
Yeah. And have you learned any things about like kind of the developer experience of agents? Because I know that's something that a lot of dev tools are starting to think about, like bringing in little agent experiences.
Yeah, for sure. Again, the folks actually building this stuff much more talented than I at constructing multi-agent architectures, but I kind of absorb this by talking to people using the product, etc. I think these multi-agent frameworks for coding seem to be the future, and this is like what a lot of the kind of community is rallying around, like different SDKs and protocols for building agents. And then the actual developer experience, I kind of make it part of my job and personal like hobbies to try out every tool that comes out. It's interesting to see where they're headed. And the experience of building with an agent, I think, is a lot like just being a software developer or maybe a manager, because all the time you're trying to think like, what is the right context for me to give to this thing? Maybe you've seen on X context engineering, kind of prompt engineering, etc. What is the right context to provide? What context should I leave out in order to get the result that I want? These are always like things I'm thinking through. And on the experience of building the agent, then you're trying to think, well, how do I get to what this person wants to build, what this person is interested in, and avoid all the pitfalls and speed bumps along the way.
Yeah. So basically, just if you're building a good experience for a developer, that's going to be a good experience for an agent. Is like kind of, I guess, the
So
key.
I think so. That's my personal take. But if we're thinking about the audience that I just spoke about, our users are maybe less technical. So it's like, how do you make that experience appeal to a broad range of users? And so a very tangible example is like our agent can read the console, right? So it can see like backend errors. It can read like logs. Well, it can see front end and backend errors rather. So it can read like server logs and then the dev console. And so typically that's something a developer would have to do. Oh, hey, why is my app broken? I need to go check like what console.log is printing out. Well, now our agent can just do that for you. Or as a developer, hey, I want to go, be able to search the internet for the best framework and then implement it into my app. That's something that will have launched by the time this podcast is out. Our agent can perform web search on your behalf, find interesting things, and then implement them into the app. And so it's really about shortening feedback loops, making for a better developer experience, even if it's not framed that way, right? Even if we're just like not showing this to the less technical folks out there or trying to confuse them, that's kind of what we're doing.
Yeah, and actually, this brings me on to something that I know we were talking about before, was like what kind of people are really, doing well on Replit and like using it a ton and succeeding.
For sure. So I think there's a really broad spectrum from everyone from like hardcore devs still get value. Maybe it's like spinning something up really quickly or validating an idea or building the scaffolding for something that they're then going to invest more time in. But I would say that, some of our real power users, the people we see getting a ton of value, are these kind of semi-technical builders with a lot of agency. And when I say agency, I just mean the willingness and ability to go and like debug things or figure out why things aren't working or like push the boundaries of what's possible. And the kind of parallel I like to draw is like someone who's really good in like Google Sheets or Excel, right? Like these folks, they're like really scrappy people who are willing to like sit in the trenches and figure out what formulas to use, which are like never documented anywhere, super hard to find. But I've built some really amazing things in like Google Sheets. You can build some really cool stuff. And so those same types of people, if they're willing to learn a little bit about code or are willing to fail or try again, you drop them in a tool like Agent. We're really democratizing the process of writing code, of creating. The code is kind of a means to an end in this instance, which is, just to take a step back, is not to say we don't have any need for devs or software developers, right? I never want to. I think that those careers are and will always be super important. But it is to say, like, there are a lot of things that devs shouldn't even really spend their time on. And so we're democratizing the ability to create those things to really anybody. And so back to your question, who is getting the most value from Replit? I think the people who have had all these really great ideas and have these things in their life that bug them or that they want to do better or that they want to create, well, now they can just create those things.
Yeah, I think this is something that's really key, isn't it? It's like this agency you mentioned. And I think also like some people just don't. Is it like people who things occur to that you could try to do this stuff as well? I don't know if that's but
Well,
like I think
yeah, I think you're getting at it. I've seen this pattern. I consider myself one of these people where I'm like, I go through the day, I'm always thinking, how do I do less of this boring stuff? How do I do things better? I have this idea for something that I want to create. Will it work? Can I sit down and try it out? I think in the past, like that would be diagnosed in a doctor's office somewhere. But as it turns out, it's also really great for like building stuff. But I definitely would say that there there are types of people, right, that are trying to push the boundaries and that want to experiment and create things. And that's not to say that if you're not interested in that, something is wrong or that's bad. But it is to say that those types of people I see have better experiences in the product because they're really curious and they're really willing to explore and they're willing to try new things and potentially fail. And these are all qualities, honestly, of developers, right? Like maybe you can think back to a time when you were learning a language. I know, like when I learned Python, I learned it with like a textbook. It was like it's honestly a terrible experience. And I'd spend, back when I was a student, like all this time trying to write like a hello world example or even just install Python. And it was the most
Oh my
frustrating
God.
thing ever.
Yeah,
Right?
because so Python is just the worst for getting started with. And like once you start writing it, it's fine, but it's like just getting it
Yeah,
on your laptop is quite hard.
exactly. But these are the things nobody knows about like being a developer. Like you're just failing all the time. Even like I try to write, you just fail all the time. And AI has made that easier. But I think, for non-engineering types, that the failure or sort of the doing really hard things isn't as normalized as it should be. And so, a really big challenge in educating for these AI native tools is like, hey, look, you're going to fail. It's going to be hard and it's going to maybe kind of suck a little bit. But once you learn how to fail and you learn how to learn, it's really fun. And I think that very closely mirrors the process of being an engineer or developer.
Hmm. Yeah, and what does the developer experience, like how people use it, like is it like are the best people kind of just like going in like a loop, like just changing their prompts, like how are they like you kind of sitting down with like the people that are best with tools like Replit, seeing how they're using it?
For sure. The very interesting thing is that like everybody uses AI like a little differently because it is so personal. It's like talking to somebody, right? And so like every time I see someone using Replit, I'm like, wow, I didn't even think of some of this stuff. The parallels I like to draw are that it's very similar to being a developer, and you're always trying to think about context, which context you can give to the agent. So hey, I have this idea for an app. What does that actually look like? Maybe you have to sit down and draw it out. Maybe you have to spend some time thinking about the architecture or all the little puzzle pieces that I have to put together. This doesn't really have to be technical, right? It could be, I need somewhere to store data. I need somewhere to persist this thing. Then you ask AI, what's the best way to implement this? And it turns out it's a database, right? But spending some
Yeah.
time like thinking about the architecture, spending some time conceptualizing what you want to build, creating a plan, and then going into the agent and giving it context like a manager of this is exactly what I want to build. And then along the way, something's going to break. Well, how do we fix that? We have to think about debugging. A lot of debugging is just first principles thinking. Something is wrong. What are the possible things that could be causing this error? And then one by one, I'm going to go through those things and check them and try and figure it out. And so these are all just principles of like potentially product management a little bit, but mostly software engineering and problem solving. And for me, it's like, how do I convey this to people without being like, you need to know debugging and console logs and all this stuff? No. You just really need to know logical thinking, first principles, thinking, and how to break down problems. And that's really it.
Classic physics guy answer to
Just gonna get on here and talk about first principles thinking. Everybody's like, all right, turn this guy off. I've had enough.
That's very cool. Yeah, but joking aside, that does sound a lot like my high school physics teacher talking about like first principles thinking, like just break it down into the steps and break it down into the what you know, what you don't know, stuff like that. Yeah.
Well, I think it's been a kind of a recurring theme in my life, and a lot of people like AI because it gets you something fast, and that's really, there's like a dopamine hit there associated with getting those outcomes, but creating software, creating applications is no different from any sort of problem or thing that you're trying to build, whether it's like you're doing work on your car, you have a home improvement project, or you need to write an essay. It's like, okay, I need to sit down and I need to think about what my goal is, and I need to think about the steps that I'm going to take to get to that goal. And then I'm going to think about how I can make incremental progress to get there. And along the way, there are going to be bumps and things aren't going to work out. And it might be hard, but you have to trust that if you sit with the problem for long enough and you think about it and you're diligent, that you're going to get to a solution. And that's how I see building with AI.
I think someone should just clip that and then we could play it to ourselves every morning before we start working. I'm inspired.
That would be, if I'm that good at motivational speeches, that'll mean a lot to me. So
yeah, if you're listening, tell us how motivational matters.
On a scale of 0 to 10.
0 to 100 million.
There you go.
Okay, so do you want to talk about the general, like, where Replit is sitting within kind of like the AI space in general?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know if I phrased. Is that like an absolutely terrible question? I was just looking at.
No. I think it's a useful question because I get people that'll come up to me and they'll say like, "Tell me how Replit is different from VS Code," and I'm like,
yeah,
where do I start? But
okay,
the state of AI is that most of us live in the Twitter sphere and we just assume everybody knows what's going on. And the reality of AI is that there are plenty of really talented engineers and really talented people that have no idea what they can accomplish. I see it partly as my kind of mission to help people understand what they can do and help them kind of believe in themselves. And so the state of where Replit is, the state of where these tools are, I think about it in 3 kind of categories. So you have like chat apps, Claude, Grok, OpenAI, etc. You have like local kind of coding agents and apps. So these are like Cursor, Claude Code, Gemini, etc. These are CLIs or maybe VS Code forks, or some other IDE that you run on your computer locally. And then you have these like cloud editors, right? And so that's like Replit, some of our other competition, right, that run in the browser. There's no installation, there's no configuration required. And it has all the capabilities of an IDE, of something that's on your machine, but it's a little bit abstracted, right? Like if you go to replit.com, separate from agent, which we talked about, you can also just create a new app, and it's like a container that runs in the cloud, and you can edit code, install languages, install all these things. That's actually super powerful on its own because it means you don't have to worry about, like I said, installing Python. You can like hot swap versions of Python, install Node, do all these things really fast. And then on the top, we have a coding agent. And so these cloud editors, I think about the positioning of Replit is a cloud editor. So if you're super pedantic about like your .file setup and like how everything works on your local machine, like Replit is not the place to start a project, right? But it is the place to start a project if you need something fast. And of sort of the cloud development editors, of those editors, Replit's really the only solution that has databases built in. So you chat with agent, it just spins up a Postgres database, ties it into your application. You don't have to go to a different website. You don't have to sign up for a different account. Authentication, right? We can just with Replit off, you say add authentication, people can log into your application using Replit, etc. Safety features, you can scan for safety. Deployments, these are all kind of built in. There are a whole host of features in this graphic. And so I think about Replit, the positioning among the market. It's the only all-in-one cloud development editor that you can build and create things in your browser without installing anything. And then because it's in like a little container, you just take that, deploy it in one click. And so really idea to app fast, that's the mission. I think we get there better than the other competition. And then the only other thing I'll call it is that we also have like a mobile app, like a native mobile app. You install it from the iOS or Android store. You can do every single thing. This is actually crazy. Every single thing that you could do on Replit.com on your phone, including write code. So big shout out there.
Yeah, actually, I heard that a lot of people actually, before the agent stuff, I'd heard that a lot of people actually were like programming with Replit on their phone. Especially, yeah, I think in some countries it was like really big. There's like a lot of people doing this.
I mean, this is something back in the day that I played around with. I remember like, because I have an iPhone and I was like, oh, how do I write Python on my iPhone? I don't know why I thought that would be cool at the time. Like, I'm a nerd, you know, but you can actually, if you just want to like write Python scripts and then you can deploy them from your phone. You could be writing cron jobs and deploying them from your iPhone if you wanted to.
That's wild. That's so cool.
Or use agent, right? And build full stack apps. You could do that too.
Yeah. And do you think it's like, it kind of feels like sometimes people like, everyone's ultimately building the same thing in a sense. Like I saw that like meme on Twitter. It was like, we're all building the same thing, aren't we? How does it converge and how does it not converge with like Devin, you know, I mean, saying Devin, but like, you know, now like Cursor are doing much more like Devin like experiences and everyone's seems to be like somewhat getting slightly closer. How do you see it like panning out with like the differences and like over time, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I wish I knew the answer to that question. You know, I think what you're saying has a lot of merit. And if you look at the industry, it is kind of like, oh, well, people are working on similar features. And even if Cursor is much more for hardcore devs, you know, some of those features parallel things that we've been doing and kind of vice versa. And so, I mean, when I look at where agents and models have come since September in almost like 10 months, it's insane. This time last year, I was writing code by hand. Now I write very little code by hand.
Yeah.
And to think, well, where will that be in a year, 2 years, 5 years? I have no idea, man. I have no idea.
Well, okay. Well, it's the first truly honest answer we've had on it, so
that makes me happy. But you know, if we look at if you're really in the industry, you can see these things starting to converge.
Yeah.
But I don't think anybody knows what will happen when the next model comes out. If there's a stepwise change in productivity, like what if we go from zero, like this step from 0 to Sonnet 3.5, we go from 3.5 to like the next thing. Who knows, right? And that's why most people that build these tools that are thinking about building products in AI, you really just have to skate to where you think the puck's headed. There's a lot of risk there, right? Because if you go in the wrong direction, you wasted a lot of resources, but there's also a lot of reward if you go in the right direction.
Yeah. One very, very extremely off-piste question, just to embarrass you, Matt. What's your personal record on the deadlift?
I knew you were gonna ask something like this, dude. So for those that are you know, maybe don't follow me on Twitter or aren't terminally online, I post videos of myself lifting from time to time. So I think working sets, I'm usually working up to around 200 kilos on a deadlift. Personal
and
best,
what's that in pounds for those
450. I believe it's like it's like 2.2, right? So it's like 440, somewhere north of 440. And then personal
working
best is
sets
maybe
of like 5 reps or something.
A couple reps usually. I think you know, like I'll work up to a heavy single and then I'll usually drop it down. So 200 kilos usually like maybe 3 to 5. And so then I haven't taken a PR attempt. PRs on the deadlifts, once you start getting really heavy, kind of take a lot out of you. So I'm not entirely sure. I think squat, I hit 207 kilos on my last cycle, so that's 455.
What? Okay, and then if you got a tip for someone just getting into lifting.
Tips. Yeah, I think people approach fitness. I'm going to hit you with a physics take, and everybody's going to hate me for it. People that are getting into fitness, for some reason, health and fitness has a lot of logical thinkers or just like random dogma stuff where people don't understand how things work. Humans understand exercise science extremely well. Like, you can go read research papers. If you find stuff that's evidence based, it's actually very much a science. And people don't look at nutrition or fitness that way. And so if you approach these things, I approach them the exact same way that I approach building. It is very much a long-term investment. And people wonder, oh, Matt, how do you lift weight like that? Well, as it turns out, if you do something for 15 years and you like do all the dumb stuff and you struggle through it and you find out what works and what works for your body and how to like perform, you can get to some pretty amazing things. And so the same way people, for some reason, like if I look at a software developer or a CEO that has built something over the course of 20 or 30 years, people don't draw the connection between like that success and like working out or lifting or nutrition or whatever. But it's like, if you sit down and you understand the basics, it's actually a lot easier because like these are known problems. You don't have to like meander through life and struggle. You sit down and you figure out the basics, you figure out what's important and like the evidence-based approaches to doing these things. And then you just do them in a sustainable way consistently for decades. That's my advice.
But drawing the parallel with Replit, it would have been like doing all the right things, but then not really getting bigger until like one day you come into the gym and this Replit guy in the gym.
Well, so that's interesting. I've thought about this. Like the cool thing about life and business, right, is that there are asymmetrical rewards and nonlinear growth. And so like, there are very much limits to how much muscle or how much stronger you can get as a human being. Like there are limits in our biology. Those limits don't exist in business. And so like the classic, I think this was like maybe Jeff Bezos or something, like in baseball, you can only hit a grand slam. You can only get 4 runs in one at bat at the most. In business, you can hit a $100 million grand slam, right? Like you could hit a $100 billion grand slam. There are no caps to the upside in one turn. So with fitness, it's very much like there are known linear progressions. With career or other goals that you're trying to achieve in life, it's much more like you could spend 20 years just goofing off and messing up and then do something amazing if you have the potential, but that's maybe not the right way to think about it.
Yeah, but that's brilliant though. That's also, I'll add it to my Matt mixtape of for the listeners. Okay, so if you have one takeaway for DevTools listening, especially over the last since you launched agents, what would it be?
I think everyone should reevaluate what is possible. And that is very broad intentionally. But if I was to give a tangible example, there are things that I couldn't automate a year ago, 5 months ago, 3 months ago, that I can automate now. Primarily as a function of one, I didn't have the time to sit down and immerse myself in the topics well enough to understand them and then get to a solution. Purely a function of time. And then there weren't dev tools, there weren't infrastructure tools that were good enough to accommodate those things. And so if you reevaluate what's possible and you reevaluate what you can learn and you give yourself like an hour or two to experiment with stuff, sit down, say, I'm going to like work with Claude to see if I can come to a solution. I'm going to work with Replit to see if I can come to a solution and deploy it. I think you're going to start to find like, especially if you think about like, levels of talent and the ease of doing things, like the difficulty is falling. So at some point, all of these things become possible. And so I would say reevaluate what is possible and what you can automate and what you can build, and then give it a shot, because there's stuff that I'm building that I see other people building and I'm like, holy cow, how is that even feasible? And it's only going to continue to increase, right? That's the exciting part.
Amazing. And do you have any shout outs for Replit where you want to direct all the DevTools people?
DevTools people, yeah, you can follow along on all of the Replit socials, YouTube, X, LinkedIn, I believe, and then I'm posting a ton on X, LinkedIn, and then videos very frequently on YouTube. So I'm sure Jack will list those out in the show notes. You can find me there. I'm online a little too much, and then I'd be remiss if I didn't say you got to go to replit.com, build an app. You got to go to docs.replit.com and learn how to build an app. So
amazing, and message us if you found Matt's inspirational words, good, or you're going to go to the gym and lift more scientifically. Thanks everyone for listening. Thanks, Matt. It was really fun.
Amazing, Jack. Thank you.